Hey, what's going on, y'all? It's your boy Skip back from VGB here with my man What's Up Pizzas. What's going on, Corey?
What's going on, Curt? I'm glad to be back. Thanks for holding it down in that last episode.
Word. And we are here ready to discuss this House of X number 2. So, shout out to Oblivion Comics and Coffee for providing us with this book for review for you. But this is more than review. We're going to go all the way in on this thing. It's going to be a little different from last time. We won't per se give you the blow by blow because we don't want to spoil it all. We want y'all to, if you haven't yet, go and read it. But also, we just want to hit hard on our favorite parts and kind of talk about what resonated with us and where we might think it's going. Because, Corey, I have a slight idea, but only a slight one. Do you feel like you have a pretty solid idea of where this is going?
I have no clue. So between what happened in the Powers of X and how they kind of split things up into the different like segments of time, and then kind of seeing this one, which was a callback to one we'd seen before, like scene for scene, but now we have the context.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like I have clear direction on the why of what we're seeing, but I have no clue on what this is going to take us to now in the future. But it definitely gave everything in this whole series um, the explanation I think I needed to see like why this is different from things we've seen in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and because some of it kind of similar. I was like, okay, how is this going to tie in, and ultimately what's going to be the result of it, and all that other stuff. And that's the key thing. Hickman is so detail oriented. Context is something that he plays with, and what's funny about context is context has a lot to do with time. Which is
Yeah.
something that Jonathan Hickman really likes to kind of muddle with a little bit. So we'll jump into it. So actually, before we dive all the way in, though, I want just in like 30 seconds, because you didn't get opportunity to be on the last one. What were your impressions of Powers of 10 before we jump into House of X2?
That's one where I really needed an adult to hold my hand through it because if you're listening to this or watching it for the first time, you'll know that I'm more of an X-Men Marvel comic book enthusiast and less of like an expert. So it took a good two run throughs for me to kind of understand who's who. Is this a new character? Should I know what that is? Where is that person coming from? Why are we looking at this? Should I know Nimrod? All this crazy stuff. But then about halfway through, and you start letting that stuff go, and I started just kind of reading the story for what it was and trying to enjoy it as a first time through. It really paints the picture of who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and fills in like the very beginnings of motivation. I thought it was really cool the Mr. Sinister tie-ins and what
Yeah.
ultimately ended up happening to him, which I thought was pretty telling of the human robo alliance. I don't know what we're gonna and what they're officially called at this point, but I enjoyed it, and I'm really stoked to learn more of these brand new characters that came out of these genetics programs.
Dope. Yeah, me too. That's something that I kind of talked about during it. How I liked that there was a Mr. Sinister tie-in, and I liked the consistency of Mr. Sinister trying real hard and then ultimately screwing things up really bad. So that was pretty interesting. I'm glad we both kind of took notice of that.
Well, what's
Uh,
cool is like in that first
mhm.
book too, like we were seeing things. We're like, wow, Logan's smiling. We got Ambassador Magneto. Like everything's perfect in the Marvel. I mean, in the mutant world. And then that scene, even at the beginning with Mystique, when she's dropping off the files, and she
Yeah.
still has self interest and she's still so self motivated. So it's not like everybody's under this magical spell where everything's perfect in their world. They still have their own motivations. Mr. Sinister's betrayal was another example of that. So while mutants are largely united and people kind of have the things they want, there are still those, uh, who have self interest in mind and are not necessarily sold out for the cause. I thought that was kind of interesting too. Contrast from book one.
Thank you, Jonathan Hickman, for writing this book. That's how I'm going to end my comment on Powers of 10. And then also, and what's so interesting about this is how they do tie in. So, right, Powers of 10 #1, the first page in there, we see, Xavier, 10 times 0, year 1, Xavier 10 times 1, 10 years later. Xavier 10 times 3, 100 years later. Xavier 10 times 4, 1,000 years later. So I was like, okay, now I get why it's different. One is House of X and one is Powers of 10. Okay, I get it. And then we get to this book, and we get to Moira McTaggart. And out the gate, like same, I'm more similar to you. I am more of an X-Men enthusiast than I am an expert because
Nice.
because thanks. The doom low hanging fruit, everyone. Because there was a large period of time when like the comics I wasn't really interested in, even for, the action and all that stuff. It just kind of had got a little muddled. So, for my favorite writer to come back to this, to come to the series and take it over and make it his own is what really got me interested. But Moira McTaggart, with the very little information I knew about her, what I did know is she's never been known to be a mutant. Like, never. So when as we start off in Powers of 10 on that first page where it goes through the exponents and the 10 times 10, and then we get to the end, a little bit in the beginning, like you mentioned, where it's like, okay, hey, yeah, you know me before, read my mind. And that was the promo, like, for the book. It was like, this is the single most important scene in X-Men history right here. And it was
Yeah.
that scene, but with no word bubbles.
Did you know from the offset who that was, that was Moira McTaggart? Whenever, because that one kind of for me, I had no idea who she was. And
Hmm.
so at the end of that, she says, read my mind, because obviously Professor X doesn't know who she is at that point either. So were you able to tell based off of everything else and the context around it who that was, or was it a reveal for you too in this book?
It was only a little bit of a reveal because I did process of elimination when I was looking at that, and I was like, the only person, because it's obviously not Jean, and it's not Rogue, it's not anyone else, and I was like, the only other like ladies that he's linked to so hardcore, like there's three. There's Jean, there's Lilandra from the Shi'ar Empire, and there's Moira McTaggart. So I did process of elimination. I was like, that's obviously not Jean. And I was like, that's
Yeah.
obviously not Lilandra because she's not a space alien with like long black sharp hair. I was like, that has to be Moira McTaggart. So let's say I was 85% sure. And then so when they
Okay.
validated it was still 15% of a reveal for me.
Yeah.
But what was the big reveal is how they immediately launched into the fact that she's a mutant, like straight up, and her mutant ability isn't, something that's so apparent to see. She reincarnates
She's
essentially.
ground. Well, it kind of like reincarnates, but it's like Groundhog's Day. And it took me a few read through of those first few panels to understand exactly what was happening. Because first I thought, they painted the picture of her first life, and
Hmm.
then they go into like, okay, on her second life, and I thought it was gonna pick up. Like if she lived from the year 2000 to the year 2010, and
Hmm.
then died, and then I thought she would come back, a baby in the year 2011, and then live the next life,
Right.
but her version of reincarnation is she goes like basically back to the same point in time, correct? Like she's born over and over again.
Right, yeah. So I mean, it is essentially the effect is closer to Groundhog's Day where things get relived, but that's also to point something out, to be transparent. Like I love Jonathan Hickman, but there I had like that wasn't something that was just so easy. I mean, like the concept and like he told us what happened and like what the results were of her mutant ability, but like how that affects everybody else's continuity, he didn't dive into. So I'm gonna put that as a point of criticism that it was a little bit of like, okay, what logic am I following? But luckily he's such a good storyteller, whereas most people other writers may live or die on the crux of this concept, whereas Jonathan Hickman's like it's just one part of the story, so the whole story doesn't fall apart just because of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what. So we know that she can continually go back to certain places in time and then affect things differently. So it's closer to Groundhog's Day than just run of the mill reincarnation.
Yeah, she would have to die to do it. And like we're so trained now that the multiverse is in everything that we watch We have Into the Spider-Verse, we have Infinity War, and they're all focused around the multiverse. So I just chalked it up to what I've been trained. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, every time she goes back and makes a new decision, that's its own divergent path of history.
Now they did
Yeah.
say that like they are splintered timelines, so
Yeah.
yeah. So that part did get laid out. So I was like, okay, well, and that's what I mean. Like it. I'm sure if I sat down and I thought through it more, then I could be like, oh, okay, I completely get it. But I mean, he gave us enough to be like, okay, we understand the parameters and the confines, and I wouldn't be surprised if they double back because that's the other thing I like about Jonathan Hickman. We're getting I think maybe a bit might be an understatement. We're getting nonlinear storytelling.
Hmm. That's
Like
right.
we're not like just like Quentin Tarantino and Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown and Kill Bill. Like we're getting nonlinear storytelling. So Powers of 10 took us a few different places: the future, the present, somewhere in the middle. House of X seems to be more linear, with some things double back. But between what we saw in Powers of 10 1 and then House of X 2, that's nonlinear. And
This whole well, yeah, no,
mhm,
even the first one, what we've gotten in House of X is nonlinear because the whole first one, the
mhm,
basis, if we want to break down like the thread that tied the whole issue together, it
mhm,
was the delegates with Magneto well past the time that Krakoa has been existing, and
right.
this whole issue was in justifying why how Professor X got the idea, and started going on with this Krakoa thing. So we're out of
Yeah.
sequence already. And
Yeah.
you're right. In Powers of X, that was my criticism, but
Mhm.
I don't want to call it a criticism yet because it's got to manifest a little bit further. But my
Right.
thought was I don't like flash forwards because I feel like they're going to spoil things for me. So if I
Mhm.
already know how certain things are going to end and that I know that this, Nimrod is going to have this kind of dominance and that they kind of basically spelled out what happens after that. So unless this
Well,
new,
at least in one splintered storyline, they
yeah,
they
exactly.
did.
So now with this one, everything you saw in that one could have just been Moira's life number 9 or something, or 12 or 20, like.
Right.
So he just cracked this egg wide open, and he has free reign and creativity to do, like we said in the first one. Like he basically has a Krakoa version of the Danger Room. They have
Mhm.
a pocket version that you can't go to. They have a Krakoa cancer that you can
Yep.
use, and they have black mind telepathy. And so
Yeah, that you
he's
can't read. Yeah.
yeah, so he's like he's just, I think we're still just opening the Lego box and dumping them onto the floor. Everything we've seen so far is still like, we think it's big revelations, but this is probably all going to play into a much bigger timeline because we're on 2 of 6. So we're still getting fed the basics.
And I will confirm, like just knowing how Jonathan Hickman writes, I'll confirm that to you as someone who his most recent biggest ongoing ensemble book is East of West, which is my favorite comic book, and Nick Dragata is my favorite writer. I mean, my favorite artist, and Jonathan Hickman's my favorite writer, as I repeat because he is. But like I can tell you some of these same tropes and concepts he's used over there, not in the exact same way, but right when you think you know something and you think you know how it's going to end, he always turns it on its ear and flips it another way. And that's the fun thing about his toy box. Jonathan Hickman's toy box is kind of like you remember Men in Black and that cat that had like the thing on it, like they were looking for a galaxy, and the whole time it was that tiny little marble on the cat's necklace. That
Yeah, the whole
was the
time.
whole galaxy. That's
Yeah.
what Jonathan Hickman's toy box is like. It's like a tiny car. It looks like it's so small, but then like 24 clowns walk out of it because he knows how to like pack things in, but still respect the space that he has to work in and that we have to read in. So that's what we get such quality stuff
I
like
gotta
this.
say too, like the
Hmm.
article, like I was a little late to get this one.
Hmm.
I put in Oblivion is amazing. If you want to start picking up this comic, call your comic shop like now and get on the
Yeah.
list because like this book is already overselling what they expected. So if you sign up for your local comic shop now, they might not get you on the list and your comic shipped out for like an issue or two. And that's
Yeah.
what I ended up getting caught in. I put in my reserve too late. I got lucky at the first one. I found it at just a rando comic shop in my area. And I
Hmm.
thought, and that's how I got powers too while I was waiting for my Oblivion to come through. And I needed
Yeah.
to do it one more time for
Hmm.
two, but it was so good and it's picking up even more momentum as we go through. Every comic shop in my area was sold out. I was calling Barnes and Noble. I was trying to find it on Amazon, and Amazon wanted
Yeah.
$18, and like it's a sick book. So I finally broke down and bought my first digital comic. I downloaded the Marvel app, used the
Hey,
little
guided
iTunes
view.
money.
Did you use guided view where you only see one panel at a time?
I
L-
did. I
Look
love
at
that.
that. See,
Yeah.
but I
So
swear, like people, like I get why people like physical comics. There's a reason why I still buy them and collect them. But I'm sorry. Like, here's the thing. I'm just gonna be straight up. When they draw these things, they don't draw a whole page at a time. They draw a panel at a time because the artist focuses on creating the impact that the panel needs. So for us, it's almost like, you know how like they put blinders on things so you can't see everything else and you have to focus straight forward.
yeah.
I love digital comics in the Comixology, DC, Image, and Marvel app because you block everything else out and now you focus on each panel. And I feel like you can absorb a little bit more.
I 100% agree. It was my first time experiencing a comic book that way. And a few times through, I would stop just because I feel like I'm lost a little bit reading it a panel at a time. And if you just double click on there, it shows you the whole thing and you can see the whole thing in context too.
Yep.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
like two different experiences.
Yep.
So it's fun reading through my first time. I did it through the guided view. And the second time, I wanted to go through just more leisurely to see if I missed things. And
Yeah.
you can see things in the full scope.
Mm-hmm.
But reading it one panel at a time was amazing. Like
Yep.
if
Now,
you're not,
oh yeah, no, what were you saying?
I was just I talked to you before. Like I just kind of had a thing against digital, but in the modern age, these things are every one of them is like you said. It's a piece of art. Every one of these panels should be like a wallpaper or something.
Yeah.
And they draw these at such high resolution. You could zoom in on the smallest of details and
Yeah,
you can
bro.
just get everything. Like look at the facial expression on
Everything.
this thing. No
Like
no
that's incredible.
pixelation. It's
Nope.
it's it's amazing. And
And you're viewing that on a retina display, which is beyond high definition.
yeah. So it's just really cool. You can appreciate the art in just even a different way. I still really want to go find X-Men 2, and I hope I could
Yes.
find a first edition just so I could have the full collection. But just to learn, read up, and for the purposes of the show and everything, I'm never gonna turn an side eye towards anybody reading digital because it's the new way to read this stuff. It's cool.
It's comics superior, just like these mutants are Homo sapiens superior.
I've ascended.
You've ascended.
Yeah,
Cory times 4. Here we go, 1,000 years
let's
from
go.
now. But what's funny is that this is topical. I'm going to keep it on the digital comics for a second because one of these issues, and it might be towards the end or maybe the middle of the road of this series, but I want to go back because I don't know when you bought the comic. I don't know if you got the director's cut or not. But when you get the digital version, you can opt to get the director's cut, and with the director's cut, it has Jonathan Hickman's script in it. So some
Oh
of the
wow.
things that we're not sure about, like I haven't done it for Powers of 10, but for House of X, I went back through and I started reading the script, and it does fill in some of the things that we were a little like, huh? It's completely in there. Now, what else is cool, if you read Jonathan Hickman's stuff, especially Black Monday Murders, he full on has things redacted that would, well, and I'm not so sure that they would be things that would obviously spoil later points because Hickman like is a skeptic and he likes to make you like have a little air of conspiracy. Did he redact
Mm.
these things on purpose or did he redact them to make you think? He always keeps you on the edge of your seat like that. So, yeah, at some point in time, maybe if it's halfway through or if they take a break one week and there's a bye week, which they probably won't because they're getting this money, I want us to pick one of the scripts and read through it and then kind of do something, like do a podcast after we've read one of the scripts.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. So
Anywho,
just
so
going
on
through
that
this this book, what was the highlight for you? Because I have a
highlight,
few that stick out.
easily. Well, actually, I know what one of yours is, so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to leave that one for you. One of the immediate highlights, like I said, was just the fact that Moira McTaggart is a mutant and has this reincarnation slash Groundhog's Day ability, which splinters timelines, which totally lines up with her character in the past, her being like into archaeology and all that other stuff. So it's like she's already a person who studies the past, linked with someone who deals with people who come from the future. So for her to be the conduit was awesome. But there's a slight thing that Hickman did, and I like this better than everything else. The second that we saw that she had her mutant ability, most of the time when people have their mutant ability, we see them have some sort of success with it kind of off the bat. Well, she was failing like one after one. I love the fact when she like discovered Charles, got on the plane and the plane crashed, so she didn't make it.
Yeah. I think that was I was thinking about that after the fact and like why, especially on the second read through, like why was that significant? And really, that's my first aha. I understand how her power works now.
Mm-hmm.
So she's on route to go do something, freak accident. Oh, now I got to start all over.
Yep.
Because I was still at that point not sure whether she was part of, starting from her own birth or starting from a new birth and it was a new person. Like I didn't fully understand it, but that felt like educational almost and
Yep.
tragic and kind of it was interesting.
Yep. Very much. So that's my first highlight. What was one of yours?
Um, I think my first highlight was I can't remember which life of hers it was, but
Mm-hmm.
basically, she discovers she has these powers on her second life, and she's
Mm-hmm.
like thinks, man, am I psycho? Like what's going on? So she dedicates her life to studying, psychology and discovers the X gene and starts thinking, well, maybe I'm a mutant and maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's a cure for this thing. And then so
Ah,
they kind
yeah.
of go through how she comes up with the cure in one of her lives, the cure, quote unquote. And
Right.
she didn't have evil intentions. It was like for people who want it, and she kind of she saw Professor X and thought, oh, this guy's kind of a prick, so I
Yeah.
don't really want to rock with that guy. So I'm gonna start, doing this. Well, the one of my favorite scenes is when she is captured by Mystique and Destiny,
Mm-hmm.
and they right off the bat, you got this brand new ability. I'm still trying to process how it works, and then you
Right.
mix them with a person who has another kind of strange ability that is basically a hard counter. If you play
Yeah.
Magic the Gathering or any game where like water, Pokemon, if Moira's a fire type, this is water, because she could see
Right.
every outcome of every life she's going to have and know where she's going to be at, what she's going to be doing, and stop it. So she
Yeah.
basically lays down the law on Moira. She's like, listen, you don't even have that many lives left. I can tell you how many you got. And I'll tell you right now, you're going down the wrong path trying to end mutants. And if you continue to do it, I'm going to keep finding you. And I'm going to kill you. And here, I'll show you how it's going to go down one time. Pyro comes out of nowhere and she's like, all right, burn her down, make it slow so that she remembers what this feels like. And that was like the toughest of love, and it worked. It was effective because after that life, Moira comes back and she's like, all right, I'm done with that.
New
This is
plan.
yeah, new plan. So I just thought that was a super gangster scene. Extremely well drawn. Like when you just look at the Destiny figure, it's just ominous
Oh,
and
so
intimidating.
beautiful. Oh
It was
yeah.
stone cold. I think you brought up already once in this Tarantino that I read it as a Tarantino scene. Like
Mm-hmm.
it had
Mm-hmm.
all the elements of tension and a huge like this is how it's gonna be, and then a crazy kind of another tragic result. And so I thought that was as far as like the first act was definitely my favorite scene.
I'm gonna piggyback off of yours because I think if we do three, that'll pretty much cover it. So my second one is it piggybacks off of yours. What I like is that when she said how many lives she had left, or how many she'll get total, she's like, I don't see beyond 10. Moira kind of marked that in her mind. And like you said, she got more aggressive. So there was a time where she was an assassin and she went back and tried to eliminate all of the Trask family line, as Trask is the person who ultimately invented the Sentinels. So she tried to eliminate that. That didn't work. She ended up
Oh,
hooking
hold
up
on.
with, yeah,
Put a pin there. Just sorry to cut you
yeah,
off. That
pinned
was
it.
that was crazy
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
like that was a revelation because everyone assumes that the Trask family invented the machines that would, join the humans and take out mutants. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a line in there that said, like, you know, people were foolish to think the machines were dormant and always there the whole time. The Trask family had nothing to do with that. So when they were going to rise, they were going to rise regardless. I just thought
Mm-hmm.
that was scary.
Yeah. Oh, very scary. I mean, like without saying it in my mind, I was like, oh, okay, Skynet. Next,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
100%.
so and Hickman is so good at playing off of those things, but even throughout all that and the different lifestyle she had and how she got more and more desperate, ultimately, like I said, you know, in one life, if one in one of her lives, she hooked up with Magneto, and I don't mean in the intimate context. I mean like teamed up with Magneto to see if he could serve it through, and that had probably my favorite panel in it with all of the like Avengers and X-Men leaping at Magneto trying to stop him. That was like a really good panel. But and then got so desperate as to also team up with Apocalypse, and
Yeah,
uh, and that was one of the variant covers. So when I saw that, I was like, "Is that Moira McTaggart with Apocalypse? Y'all got some splaining to do." And then
yeah,
Jonathan Hickman explained it, and I was like, "Okay, I'll never say you got explaining to do again, Jonathan Hickman."
yeah,
But what I was saying, but ultimately what I was getting to is just, it's funny how Powers of 10 and Destiny straight up said you have 10 lives. And there's no way for them to know or not. But right now, in the context of her finally approaching Professor Xavier, Charles Xavier, like this, it seems like she's on her 10th,
yeah,
which is the
yeah. At this
last one.
point, and it's kind of like almost going back to you see her become more and more extreme. The word that they use is radical, which I
Right.
liked.
Mm-hmm.
And then in this one, which justifies the entire House of X, basically, is that she went through 10 lifetimes of different scenarios of trying all sorts of different things, partnering with
Mm-hmm.
Professor X, doing it the way she thought was best first, trying Magneto, trying just murdering everybody, trying with Apocalypse as a Hail Mary. None of
Right.
it's working. So this time she goes to a 17-year-old Professor X, I believe, a young man Professor
Yeah.
X, and
Mm-hmm.
says, just read my mind and let's do this. Like, let's hammer it out. Here's everything I know. Let's start a whole brand new, attempt at it. And that's what we know as House of X. It's Charles Xavier equipped with the knowledge of 10 Moira McTaggart lifetimes, or 9.
This is crazy. Well, no, technically 10 as far as up until that point, because he could still read
Yeah.
her mind for everything. So I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
and
right.
this is so now, and remember, it's so funny how I kept saying power. Remember when I did the first review when we were live at the fair, and I was like, power. The X-Men have their power back, and then Powers of 10. I mean, then House of X. And everybody reads it, and everybody says the same thing. When I did a panel for Thinking Critical, which is my favorite comic book YouTuber, and he invited me on there, and I said power, and everybody else was like, yeah, power. Whether they liked it or not, they were like, they ain't backing down. They got a position of power. So it's so
Yeah.
funny reading Powers of 10 and then realizing, okay, so this has to do with like exponentially, like 10 times 10 times 10. Okay, so the time that we're dealing with ultimately will multiply. But then when she comes and we find she has 10 lifetimes, so this is the power of Moira, of 10 lifetimes of information of Moira McTaggart. And then she is not the conduit. She is not the doer. She lets Charles just take the information and then sits back to see what he does with that power.
Yeah. Dang. It's so significant in so many ways. That's crazy. I wasn't even thinking of it
Hickman!
mathematically. Oh,
Bro,
this is really good.
Corey, you said you're ready for East to West. Once this is over, I'm gonna take you there. Anyway, what was your last one?
Before I get there, I just want to go back because I found the panel.
Okay.
This was to me, one of the scariest things a person could write in the book. But it says
Okay.
artificial intelligence is like a fire. It's a discovery, not an invention. All she succeeded in doing was stopping a Trask from being the first human to burn their hand. Holy shit! So it's like she, was thinking Trask invented artificial intelligence, but it was there the whole time. He just
The whole
discovered
time.
it. That was terrible.
And and
I
and
think,
and, and let me piggyback off of that real quick, literally for 20 seconds. The very last main page before we get to the graphic that shows Moira McTaggart's lifetime lines is her quote. I am here. I have always been here. And
yeah,
it's what's funny is that it says Moira X, not Moira McTaggart.
So
So
Moira
the
10.
Moira 10.
Yeah.
Oh, the 10th Moira.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
We're having a podcast and we're discovering new stuff. All right, that's on you, bro. You go. Your last one.
um, I think my last part, because I think for me we covered all the story beats, but I
Yeah.
just really loved the montage of seeing
Hmm.
the lives and
Yeah.
seeing artwork and things that we've seen in past panels and books, like with new information and light, like when they
Right.
called when they were kind of going through the different phases of X-Men, and they did like through the gifted years and had all the old school costumes, and then
Yeah.
through the time of hate and fear with like the old comic book, like I think the good years for me, and then through the lost decade and had all of the when they all got infected with the Phoenix Force in the
Yeah.
X-Men versus Avengers comic line. And
Hmm.
then even just going through and seeing like all the Avengers pop up through a panel, which was that like a nod to the Ultimate Universe when House of M, or
Yeah,
was this?
I believe it was because that's kind of the like the biggest store. Like I'm thinking yeah, because the other thing that links it, someone else, I think it was Sergeant Batts brought this up in the Thinking Critical panel, is that the lettering ties to the Ultimate Universe. So I think
Mm,
along with the lettering, that is another kind of nod to the Ultimate Universe. And I think since she's lived so many lifetimes and since they splinter, I think one of the ones she lived through was an Ultimate Universe timeline.
yeah, that's what I kind of got the vibe for, because she says I went and I pleaded to Magneto, and Magneto was raged. And then the very next
Mm.
panel, it shows him like dropping bombs on the White House, and
Yeah.
then you see like Thor and Hulk and Spider-Man all fighting Magneto. And the only time that I was able to remember that as being like a pretty big significant storyline was that Ultimate Universe. And then of
Yeah.
course you get to see the amazing panels of Apocalypse fighting Nimrod, and the, what do they call it, the Endless War or something like that. So I
Right.
think just the artwork and just the things you get to see drawn out in that last part was my favorite.
Absolutely, I agree. Like what you touched on, that was my favorite panel when everybody was going towards Magneto and he had those two ballistic missiles, hurling down. It was incredible, man. But this is only House of X 2, number 2.
Two.
We still have 4 more of these and 5 more of Powers of 10. Like,
Yeah.
so Cory, to cap it off, where do you see this where do you see this going?
So I honestly don't know. We're now in between so many different timelines, and I guess more information on how we got to Krakoa. Like I want to know what happened immediately after Professor X learned, Moira Ten's information.
Hmm.
So I want to see the light switch moment, or more of his rationale between what Magneto said in issue 1, because we haven't really gone back to that motivation yet, where he says you have the new gods, or you have new gods now. So like that was super ominous and pretty telling of where their head is at and how they're approaching human relations. But I want to know why how he got there. Like
Right.
why does he think being their gods is going to be the answer, and what's so I just want to see a little bit more of like right this time period after he reads Moira's mind.
Absolutely. Makes sense. Where I see it going, I feel like I had more of a clue immediately after I read it. The only thing that kind of makes sense to me, you know what? I'm totally I feel like I'm totally clueless now. This is not the first time. But if you want to be clueless with any writer, you want to be clueless with Jonathan Hickman. This is a master storyteller. You don't need to see what's around the corner. This is the guy that you just trust, you just nod and you walk out on blind faith, and you will get rewarded for your blind faith. He will give you vision, he will give you sight, he will bring light.
Yeah.
He will bring darkness with it, and he will give you one of the most spectacular stories that you've ever experienced in your life if you're just willing to commit to the story, grab your issues. This is a story to commit to. There's a reason why this is, in my personal opinion, the best comic book out right now. And it sounds like that's resounding with the rest of everybody because they're in second printings already, like immediately the week after a book comes out. It's unprecedented. So
That's
thanks
wild.
again. It's wild, bro. Like
Yeah.
it, I'm telling you, this is unheard of. You don't hear about this with every new comic. The Batman comic book by Tom King, and everybody knows Brian Michael Bendis and Tom King. I'm like, but
Yeah.
that's not even happening with them. They're losing readers as this can't produce enough books for people.
I think another interesting thing, a hurdle that I want to see crossed is, the tension that we got to see between the Fantastic Four and Cyclops. I want
Oh
to see
yeah.
that manifest a little bit more because this still does take place in the larger Marvel continuity, obviously. So we do have guys like Thor and Captain America and Nick Fury and all these dudes out there who, when this story, is bubbling up and getting huge, these guys are going to have a say in all this too. And like, is Captain America going to kneel to the god of Xavier? Like, I highly doubt it. So I don't want to see this become necessarily an Avengers thing and crossover with everybody, but I'm curious to see, like, they've already introduced the Fantastic Four as characters in this story, so I'm assuming we're going to see them again. When we're figuring out either what's going on with Sabretooth, or they're going to have something to say about this. So um, there's just going to be a lot of conflict. I want to see that stuff kind of shake out.
Hey Sue, tell your son when he's ready, he's got a family in Krakoa waiting for him. Two
Yeah.
mutates, Sue Storm, Reed Richards, they're mutates because they went through an event that mutated them. They weren't born that way. They got together and they had kids. And their son is a mutant. He was
Yep.
born that way. He did not go through an occurrence. So you will see the manifestation of that.
And in there, as far as they're concerned, he is an Omega level uh mutant, and that's their most precious resource, as they said in that book. That's what they're there to protect, is the 10 Omega level mutants that they have, and that's one of them. So that no matter what, they're going to be watching him.
Wait, Corey, how many Omega level mutants did they have?
X number.
And that's the Roman numeral for
10.
and that, everybody,
It all goes to
is
10.
is Krakoacast number 3. Thank you so much for joining us. What's Up Pieces himself, Corey Vincent. You know where to find him. Video Game Bang Wednesdays and Saturdays. Me, Mr. Skipintosh himself. You will find me here every week, and then obviously you will see the reviews for comics that I do. I'm gonna have to start adding additional comics for Oblivion Comics and Coffee, because House of X and Powers of 10 are basically just gonna consume my whole reading if I don't put something else on the list. So
Yeah,
expect different stuff.
it's got me picking up more comics already. Like, I got the Comixology free trial right now, so I'm reading through like Spider-Man stuff, and it's just been a lot of fun. So it's really cool. I'm hoping that I'm just one of, hopefully thousands that are, getting back into comics and kind of reigniting that passion, because they have been kind of, lackluster in, you don't get a series like this all the time. And so it's been incredibly fun. I look forward to Wednesdays now, like I would look forward to Game of Thrones coming up on Sunday. Like, I cannot wait to get to the comic shop to grab this fucking book, and I've never felt that way about a comic book before.
You said Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Well,
say it
it'll
one more
end.
time. East of West. I'm gonna say it one more time. That's all I gotta say. All right, y'all. We gotta wrap it up. Thanks so
Yep.
much for joining us again. Check out Video Game Bang, Video Game _ Bang on Twitch, and we'll have more stuff for you coming out there. Oh, and check me playing Marvel Ultimate Alliance Black Order there too, because I played a little bit the other night, just a quick stream, and I'll be playing more because I just got my new 8-bit Do controller, so I'll
Oh,
definitely
I'm
be playing more.
jealous. You got the new one.
You
You
know
got
I
the
did.
plus.
I got that
Nice.
plus. But what happens when you turn a plus diagonal?
All right, now
It's
you're
a
just reaching,
10.
dude. Now, okay,
Bye.
end it. Turn it off.